Welcome to the Line Life podcast. I'm Jeff Postlethwaite, Senior Editor of T&D World, and today we're bringing you more stories of the grit, courage, and inspirational teamwork that it takes to be a line worker.
Hi, my name is Amy Fishbach, and I'm the Field Editor for T&D World magazine. Thank you for tuning in to the Line Life podcast. T&D World has been producing this podcast, which celebrates the line trade, for a few years now, and we're getting close to airing our 100th episode. If you're not already part of our Line Life podcast community, make sure that you go to linelife.podbean.com and click follow in the top right, so you'll be alerted when new episodes are available. You can also listen and subscribe in your favorite podcasting app. We launch interview-style episodes with line workers and others in the line trade on the first and third Fridays of each month, and audio stories which are narrated from articles in T&D World's print magazine in our In Case You Missed It series on the second and fourth Fridays of each month. In addition, we release sponsored T&D Talk bonus episodes which focus on how a company is using our product or service in the utility industry. And coming up at the end of March, we will be starting with part 1 of a 3-part series sponsored by Southwire, and the first episode will feature Demco. Also, if you enjoy listening to the Line Life podcast, make sure you share it with your friends, colleagues, and others in the industry. Please give us a like and a comment to let us know what you'd like to hear in future episodes. You can also send an email to me, Amy Fishbach, the host of the Line Life podcast, at amyfishbach@gmail.com with your suggestions for guests or topics for future episodes. We also share the Line Life podcast episodes on social media, including Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. And if you like an episode, feel free to share it to your network. In addition to posting the new episodes at linelife.podbean.com, I also include the promos on the T&D World website at www.tdworld.com/podcasts, and also include them in the Lineman Life e-newsletter, which comes out the first and third Fridays of each month. Now let's move on to today's episode, which features Jon Backman, who was profiled in our April 2025 Line Worker Focus Department, which will soon be available at tdworld.com. He also wrote an article for T&D World, which will be published in the May 2025 issue, about responding to radio frequency interference calls in his area and some tips and strategies for other line workers. Jon Backman is an IBEW journeyman line worker in the Pacific Northwest, a Troubleman for Puget Sound Energy, and also the founder of Making Connections, LLC. When I interviewed Jon, he was at a conference in San Antonio to deliver a presentation with another peer line worker to talk about leadership training in the line trade. Now, here is my interview with Jon Backman. Jon, thank you so much for taking time out to join us for the Line Life podcast.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here, Amy.
It's great to have you on. So, Jon, to begin, can you talk a little bit about your career in the line trade with our Line Life podcast listeners?
Yeah, of course. So I started in the line trade about 25 years ago. I went to the Northwest Lineman College in Idaho. When I left there, kind of was thrown into the job search world. And my first opportunity came through the line clearance tree trimming apprenticeship program. So I did that for a couple years, worked with some really good people there, learned a lot of really good work ethic qualities and accountability. I enjoyed that a lot until I finally got an opportunity as a line apprentice at one of the municipalities in Washington State. Went there, did my apprenticeship, had again, great experience, really good training, exposed to all kinds of underground overhead, transmission, distribution, a lot of climbing, a lot of energized work. It was a really first-rate apprenticeship program that I got to be part of. And when I topped out there, I kind of had a desire to get closer back to the part of the state where I had grown up, where I was from. So the closest move was to work as a lineman at a PUD, still in the same state in Washington, but just closer to where I was from. Worked there for a short time, and then Eventually, I got an opportunity to interview and was hired for a role as a troubleman or electric first responder at the current utility I work for, also in Washington State.
Perfect. And then what inspired you to pursue a career in line work?
Well, my story's a little different than a lot of line workers, but I guess everyone's story is a little different. So for me, it was really just timing. I was kind of at a point in my life in my early 20s that I didn't have a direction like a lot of young people, and I was looking for some kind of career path. I knew I was in a position that I wanted to get married, and so I kind of needed to have a serious job, I thought. So, as luck would have it, my parents had met somebody who they had a couple sons who were attending the Northwest Lineman College that I mentioned earlier. And they told me about it. They knew I was kind of open eyed looking for opportunities, and I checked it out and it looked fun. It looked like the right fit for me. It was physical, it was mental, it was outdoors, and it just looked like something that would fit me well. So it was sort of a random opportunity, but I'm really thankful it happened because that's what got me here.
So, John, talk about your time at Northwest Lineman College. What was that experience like for you?
So I went to the Northwest Lineman College in 2001. And at that time, line colleges were still not incredibly common. They've become really common now. It's a really common way for apprentices to get into the trade, almost a prerequisite. But my experience there was great. I didn't have really any kind of electrical working experience or much knowledge base before. And when I got there, I learned, you know, I got a lot of pole climbing exposure, some basic electricity training. We learned about transformer basics, got a commercial driver's license. And I also kind of just learned that atmosphere of a bunch of young, eager people wanting to learn and wanting to work together, being led by a group of older, experienced veteran line workers who were eager to pass that knowledge down. It was a really positive experience. Pretty neat thing they've got going.
That's wonderful. And then how do you think the training back then compares to what they're getting today?
I would say, well, the biggest difference I would say right off the bat with the training then and now is that free climbing was not only allowed, but maybe almost encouraged back then. Now it's 100% fall arrest. And as a matter of fact, when I did my apprenticeship, part of our climbing class or climbing school that we had, we were actually required to free climb. I think it was like a 45-foot pole to the top and I don't know, belt around the pole and do something and free climb back down. And that's stark contrast to now because you can't, climb anything unbelted. And that's a good change. I mean, we want to prevent accidents and you can't fall from a pole if you're belted in. So that's probably just the biggest thing I noticed. So, I mean, the fall arrest differences are pretty obvious, how that's changed over the years. And I guess one of the other things that stands out a lot is just the technology that has come into everyone's life in that 25-year period. I mean, it was still really an analog world back then. It was paper workbooks, paper, notebooks, doing everything by hand with a pen and pencil, which a lot of us still kind of have a preference toward. But, the whole world is digital now. And so that's a big change for sure.
Yes, definitely. And now, John, can you talk about your current job in the line trade and what a day in the life is like for you?
So currently, my full-time job is that I'm employed as a troubleman, which is an electric first response lineman for my local utility. And so a troubleman is a journeyman lineman who we do some routine scheduled work, kind of customer facing work, but it's got to be work that we can pull away quickly and easily from because our primary responsibility really is to respond to outages and emergencies or any kind of public safety hazards involving the electrical system. So really when something goes wrong with our system, we're the first ones on site. We mitigate any hazards, isolate any damage, and kind of perform triage on the system. We do a lot of storm response. We're the first responders for any kind of storm. There are a lot of overtime call outs, kind of 24/7 if you want to take them. And it's unpredictable, which can make it really hard, especially long term, trying to live a family life or balance that with the home life. And that's probably one of the bigger challenges. But it's also It's a very rewarding job too. You really get to serve your community.
Absolutely. And then, John, can you talk about being a troubleman? What are some of your memorable experiences in that role, like responding to accidents or storms?
Well, boy, there's so many that kind of blend together, but I mean, the storms are obviously kind of a poignant memory. It's when you see kind of the most concentrated, massive damage. And it's also, storms are when we get the most public engagement. It's when our customers really appreciate us the most. And I understand that. That's kind of when we're noticed the most. As a utility and a utility worker, we kind of don't want our customers to be aware of us. If we're doing our job well, they don't have to think about us. They just flip the switch and the lights come on. So the storms always stand out. There's a lot of pride in storm response and kind of being the ones to come out and make things right and get the lights back on for everyone in your community. But beyond that, sometimes even just the little things. We interact with and interface with a lot of local electricians, and you kind of form relationships with members of your communities, and you get a lot of opportunities to actually help individual people, which is not always typical of like the traditional line crew environment. So personally, I actually really like that part of it too.
So, what is some of the severe weather that you get in the Pacific Northwest?
So the Pacific Northwest is different. We don't have hurricanes. We don't have tornadoes. We get the occasional ice or freezing rainstorm, but really everyone hears about the rain in the Pacific Northwest. And that's true. We get a lot of rain, a lot of moss, but we also have big, big trees. We've got, 100+ foot trees all around us. So we'll get these really defined specific weather patterns that kind of come down through the mountains or through river valleys, and it'll just knock swaths of these huge trees down. So when we get a powerful storm, the damage can be pretty heavy because we get these really big trees that come down, and instead of just breaking wire, we've got full poles that are breaking, and the restoration efforts are pretty heavy sometimes.
Sure. And then what about mutual aid? Have you traveled to other parts of the country for storm restoration?
I have personally not. I've always been a little interested in it, but never had the opportunity.
Okay, great. And now let's move on to leadership training. Can you talk about the need for improved training and what you're seeing happening right now to prepare line workers for leadership roles?
So, this is one of my favorite questions. So, in our industry, there's really become a lack of people in the utility trade or in the utility field with leadership roles who also have field experience. That natural progression doesn't happen as much as it used to. And then on the flip side of that, we don't have any kind of real formal leadership training for the people in leadership roles. So when you combine that lack of field workers in the leadership roles with the lack of leadership training, it's created this big gap. And the gap has made things more difficult in the workplace. Communication isn't happening as efficiently as it should. Collaboration doesn't happen as effectively as it should. And we've got all these challenges in our industry pushing up against us. And you can just feel that we're not set up to handle it as well as we could be because of that gap.
So, John, what do you think utilities and contractors can do to improve their leadership training?
Well, a lot of the kind of current and the past training that we've relied on for years is sort of the traditional approach, using an apprenticeship to build those skill-based knowledge sets. And, we do compliance training where people are fulfilling the requirements they need to have for their role. But really, I think it would be valuable to focus more on some of the soft skills, if you want to call them that. Things like communication and collaboration, trust and responsibility, which are terms that are not always part of the traditional line working world, but they're all human factors, and we're all humans trying to work together in a world that's just increasingly difficult to kind of work in. And I think that it'd be really valuable to focus on some of those things to kind of bring people back together.
And what do you think are some skills of an effective leader in the line trade?
An effective leader really, if you could find someone with this, would be kind of a combination of someone who's got some of those technical skills from the field, the experience and the knowledge from that work in the field, but then also a real strong foundation of those interpersonal skills. So you can kind of relate to the people who do the work as workers and also relate to them as people.
Yes, that sounds like it would be very important. And Jon, let's next move on to safety. What have you seen in the line trade to improve safety and efficiency in terms of tools, technology, or training?
So I guess my thought on safety and how that's progressed over the years would be there are always a lot of tools and technological developments. I mean, safety in our trade is I don't want to call it a market, but it is a big market, and it should be. And utilities put a lot of effort and time and money into their safety programs. So, one thing that's come up is in the last 5 or 10 years, for instance, at the utility I work at, all of our employees who are out in the field carry an AED on their truck, which you never used to see before. I actually had an experience in the last couple months where I watched an AED save a person's life. And so I'm a complete believer in that. I think it's great that there are just more and more of them available. And beyond the tools and technology, I think really what I've seen change the most is just the attitude toward safety. I mean, we say safety first, we say safety is our first priority, but I really have watched people over the years make the change to where they really are prioritizing safety at work. And that's a change for the better.
And now let's talk about RFI inspections because you have an article coming up in our May 2025 Electric Utility Operations section. Can you talk about how you got involved with RFI troubleshooting and what do you think our Line Life podcast listeners should know about this topic?
So RFI is kind of a funny topic. It's something that most line workers don't have much involvement with. There's kind of this little snippet in your apprenticeship where you learn to bend over the tail of a tie wire so you don't create this little gap and cause interference on over-the-air TV or radio signals, which most people don't even use anymore. And that's what RFI is. RFI stands for radio frequency interference. And it's a real kind of a niche topic in line work. So most companies will have maybe one person who specializes in it because it doesn't come up all that often. And that's how I got involved. We had one of our kind of older senior Troubleman, who was our designated RFI responder. And he'd been doing it for several years, kind of just going through the motions the way he knew how. And I think he just kind of got bored of doing it. And we were talking one day and he brought it up and I showed interest and he asked if I wanted to do it. And just being eager and younger, I said yes. So it led to some training opportunities. Like I said, it's kind of an obscure topic, but I was able to find one guy who's kind of the national expert, I would say, on RFI. His name's Mike Martin, and he gives a great training seminar. He usually has one once a year, and I got to go to that. I've been twice, actually, and my response and investigation skills really improved based on what he taught me. And so it's just kind of one of those funny little subcategories of line work that, most people don't realize they're there, but once you get yourself involved, it's a fun opportunity to learn more and kind of hone your skills.
So, Jon, is there anyone you want to give a shout out to on this Line Life podcast episode?
I mean, really, I would thank all the line workers out there, everybody who's out in the field, whether you're a first step apprentice or you're about to retire, because it's really a wonderful trade. I mean, it's a great way of life. Society relies on us more and more all the time for everything. And we may feel unappreciated sometimes because we're out here doing the hard work and people don't put a lot of thought into where their electricity comes from. but really that just means we're doing our job well. So I just want to thank everyone in the trade, everyone, who supports the trade. And I would encourage any young person who's maybe kind of searching for direction to consider it, because it's a great opportunity.
I absolutely love that. Well, Jon, thank you so much for joining us for the Line Life podcast.
Thank you, Amy. Great to be here. I appreciate it.
This episode of the Line Life podcast was written, recorded, and edited by Amy Fishbach. It was produced by Jeff Postlethwaite. That's me. To listen to past episodes, visit www.tdworld.com/podcasts or find us at Podbean. You could also drop us a voice memo or message at linelifepodcast@gmail.com with your comments on this episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please follow this show on Podbean or your favorite podcasting app to be updated when new episodes are released. Thank you for listening.